Welcome, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to the Defense Innovation Board Summer Public Meeting. My name is Colleen Laughlin, and I am the Executive Director and Designated Federal Officer of the Defense Innovation Board. In the room, please make sure to silence your phones if you have them. Today's meeting is being recorded and live streamed to allow members of the public to attend virtually. Thank you to DMA for providing their expert support to this event. The board will now convene its public session. And Mike, I will turn it over to you, please.
Well, thank you, Colleen, and hello to everyone who is watching online. Thank you all for joining us. On behalf of my fellow board members, let me begin by saying that we're all grateful for the continued opportunity to serve and to support the U.S. service members as they carry out their vitally important missions in an ever-changing and dangerous world where they're risking their lives to protect our country. We should never forget that. The purpose of our work is to bring innovative new ideas and recommendations to help them and help the Department of Defense leadership. Today's meeting is another important step, we think, in that process as we release our first official set of recommendations to the public. Our reports, which we'll share with you in a few moments, represent the combination of 6 months of work together. Our board is grateful for the insights of leaders from across the armed services and government agencies, as well as entrepreneurs, investors, and contractors. And I think it's important for the public to know, while we've all heard about the many complex, persistent challenges in protecting our national security, we've also seen a strong readiness and willingness to meet those challenges head on, as evidenced by the department's commitment to working closely with us. We've had the opportunity to sit down with people from all military ranks and backgrounds, and we've seen how they are working tirelessly to solve problems. Our job is to advise the department and help facilitate more of the public-private partnerships that we think can support its missions. For example, just last month, officials from the United States and India announced a new initiative during Prime Minister Modi's visit here. That initiative can strengthen defense industry startups in both our countries and hopefully serve as a model for the more public-private partnerships that we need to follow. Today, our board's two task forces will report on our findings in 2 specific areas that Secretary Austin directed us to consider. 1, science and technology strategy, and 2, strategic investment capital. We've asked Max Thornberry to chair the former and Will Roper to do the second one. So I'll ask Mac to update us first on what you and the other board members have done. Thank you for your service. If you would take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's my pleasure to present to the full board our report titled An Innovation Strategy for the Decisive Decade. And first and foremost, I want to express my appreciation and admiration for the other members you appointed to this task force. To have the president of a leading college of engineering, a data and analytics specialist from industry who spent time in government and also in uniform, not to mention a former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, was an incredible wealth of experience and insights that was tremendously helpful. Each of them, as well as our wonderful staff led by Zach and Elliot, put a lot of time into this over the last 6 months, talking with all sorts of folks inside and outside the building, inside and outside government, industry, academia, think tanks, tried to draw on the best of the ideas that are out there. As you mentioned, we were asked to assess the department's first ever National Defense Science and Technology Strategy and assess whether it met the requirements of law as defined by the FY22 National Defense Authorization Act passed by Congress, and also whether it aligned with the National Defense Strategy. We did not approach this as a grade their papers sort of exercise. We tried to step back and say, okay, what's the purpose of a strategy? And will this one achieve that purpose? And if you think about it, the purpose of any S&T strategy is pretty straightforward. It's to get the very best into the hands of our warfighters so that they can do the job that our country asked them to do. But they deserve the very best from the whole country, not just a few labs or companies, the whole nation. Does this document do that? Well, we've got our doubts. Not that we disagree with any of the objectives or aspiration that is written in here, but we also heard very clearly, and all of us have experienced, that there is a culture that makes it very difficult to draw on the best of the whole country to assist and enable our warfighters. And it resists other attempts to move faster and take non-traditional approaches. As a matter of fact, it was suggested to us that the culture of obstructionism will not change until it is explicitly called out. And if we do nothing else in our report, we want to call out that culture that resists change, resists moving faster, and resists taking non-traditional approaches. We think for any S&T strategy to actually achieve those objectives, you got to have three things. One of them is a sense of urgency. And we have seen that the department can move fast, but usually in wartime. So you got to have the sense of urgency of wartime without the casualties of war. And it's really more about culture than anything else. Where do the incentives lead you? What's rewarded? What's punished? And I would suggest that is a topic that deserves further exploration from us or other entities. So you got to have a sense of urgency. And secondly, you've got to have accountability to force through countercultural change through the system. And what really strikes me is that there are lots of studies on this topic, and they all say basically the same thing. And yet change only happens at the margin. So the problem is not knowing what the problems are or knowing what to do. The problem is making the change. And that's where we came back to accountability. And ultimately, only the secretary and the deputy secretary have the authority within DOD to push through change that is being resisted at a number of levels. And that requires their personal, persistent, relentless involvement. Now, obviously, there's a big role for Congress here. There's obviously a role for the service secretaries, the joint staff, but without those top two leading the way, it's not going to happen. So you got to have a sense of urgency, accountability, and third, you got to have the people, the talent. And they are as fundamental here as they are anywhere else. They're our key advantage, and yet we make it too hard to work in government and too hard to work with government. One of the key points that was emphasized to us in our session with institutions of higher learning was that there needs to be a clearer, more persistent call to all Americans to serve this national security mission. It may be in that uniform, it may be out of uniform, it may be in the lab, it may be out on the front lines, but we have not heard as much about what's at stake, why it's important. And that's one of the requests, or one of the suggestions we make in our report. So I would just say, Mr. Chairman, there's a lot at stake. Our war fighters deserve our best, and we have challenges today in getting them our best. And that's what I think all of us and the department and others need to focus on. And with that, I would turn to other task force members if they have amplifications or corrections that they'd like to make.
Okay. Unanimous report, it would seem. But we're ready to take a vote on it. I just wanted to thank you and all the people on your team for doing the best you can for our country. We're the most wonderful country in the world, but we're always being threatened, particularly now. And anything that we can do to help them do their mission and have careers so that they stay in and keep serving is well worth the effort that we put in. And I think the public should know we all feel honored to have been asked to do this and thrilled to be able to do it. We need a vote on this, so I would ask each of you to vote yay or nay. Gilda Barabino.
Yay.
Yay. Susan Gordon.
Yay.
Michael Mullen, the former head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Yay. Charles Phillips.
Yay.
Will Roper.
Yay.
Ryan Swan.
Yay.
Mac Thornberry, who better vote yes for committee.
Okay.
And Reed Hoffman.
Yay.
Will, it is your turn. We finished with the science and technology study. Now you're going to brief us on the strategic investment capital study.
Right. Thanks, Mike. And I want to start as well by thanking everyone that was involved with the study. Charles Phillips, Sue Gordon, Reed Hoffman, and Morgan Katz, who are all of our task force participants. I want to thank Colleen and the DIB staff who had to facilitate a lot of meetings. We met or surveyed 310 different startups, 64 different venture capitalists, and 56 different established DoD companies to really understand a broad set of perspectives about challenges of DoD acting as an investor. I also want to thank Jim Hickey, who appointed a provider to help work and significantly improve the document. We wouldn't have gotten this study done without all of you, so thank you for that. So we took our study to mean the DoD wants to be an investor. It just doesn't know how to do that. It's created the Office of Strategic Capital. It wants this to be successful. But we realized as a team that unless we pulled back and looked at the whole ecosystem around which DoD investment takes place, you could create something that's really good, put it into an otherwise bad system and have it fail. And the term Valley of Death came up so recurringly in our study, we decided to embrace it and to call our study Terraforming the Valley of Death. We systematically walked from one side of the valley to the other and identified reforms that we thought were needed so that companies can routinely get to recurring revenue in defense. That's the goal line that we're trying to reach. And we need a place for them to start with early stage investment. That's the starting line. We need a transparent, predictable process that can scale investments from one side of the valley to the other. And universally, from people outside the government, investments, government officials that we talk to, no one believes that the process that we have today can scale those investments and succeed. And there's a reason to treat this with a high degree of urgency. There are a lot of companies and investors that at really a historic acme are wanting to work in defense who haven't before. And if the Defense Department does not get them to recurring revenue, this window may not be repeated. And this is the decisive decade against China. So we need to get new companies into the pipeline that are somewhere in between the defense industrial base and the commercial industrial base that doesn't work with us at all, a dual use industrial base with a process that makes sense for them. The way we framed our problem is that there are three components of the valley. There's the investment side of the valley where R&D money is spent. There's the middle of the valley that's currently empty, and I'm going to get to in a second. Then there's the procurement side of the valley. That's the big POM budget, the big money that is spent in defense, but with a lot of restrictions and a lack of flexibility. You have to make reforms in all three, or else you can die at any point in the valley. You either don't get started, you die of dehydration in the middle, or there's no fertile ground on the other side. So you have to do them. And if you're not willing to do all three, you're not likely going to achieve that goal of getting companies to recurring revenue. So our macro conclusion is that the DoD is going to have to care about the future industrial base as much as it does about warfighting readiness today. If it doesn't do that, then it will keep defaulting more and more to readiness at the cost of not growing the industrial base. And this window of opportunity with VCs and startups could well be lost. So let's start on the investment side of the valley. There was a great study we referenced that we called the Bressler study. It was by Amanda and Alex Bressler and presented at the Naval Postgraduate School's Acquisition Research Symposium. It had a lot of great data. So you might ask, well, why aren't companies succeeding in the system? Well, only 16% of companies that got an early stage investment type contract actually made it to the next step of phase 3 that could put them into procurement. So it's not really a high percentage rate. And if you drill down inside of that, 0.53% of the 4,703 companies that were awarded these investment type contracts dominated, where's my number? 18% of the entire amount. So 0.53% are taking 18% of the total. And the study by the Bresslers concludes that this system is not going to get companies across the valley, and we agreed. Some of the systemic issues we saw was not leveraging the total addressable market potential of the DoD. There's a lot of overlap between military needs and commercial ones. That's part of DoD's value proposition that it's not leveraging. It's not generating product market fit via its investments. A lot of its R&D spent completely separately from the POM process. And so just because you have an R&D contract doesn't tell you anything about whether you're moving towards recurring revenue, and that's harmful for companies and investors. The DoD as a whole is not tiering its investments like the private sector does. They go from C to Series A, B. The investments get fewer as they get bigger because investors are growing companies that can go change the world. The DoD does way too many small investments that are not capable of growing those world changers. We found for every service, the research lab was an impediment to working with the dual use ecosystem. And though we didn't look at reforming the lab, we highlight it as something that should be looked at as a follow-on step. And then across the board, not having timely and predictable correspondence. Companies don't know when they're going to be told whether they're selected or not. So getting a fast no instead of a very slow maybe is desperately needed for companies to plan for DoD on their growth path. And generally not using modern development practice, especially digital ones, cuts off a lot of companies that are working in digital tech and AI because the DoD hasn't caught up yet with the internet age, much less the AI age. We looked at all of the innovation organizations, the DIUs, the OSCs, the service research hubs, and we identified 10 best practices that we saw in at least one of them, but that were not co-located in any one of them. Leveraging outside presence, getting outside fence lines, focusing on dual use, having non-contractual mechanisms so that you're not falling inside the FAR, training, staffing, and equipping for the mission. Across the board, the innovation mission was under-resourced. It's the passionate few that were trying to do this on behalf of their much larger organization. That passionate few was getting burned out. Rapid contracts and payments, public-private investment matching. We can pool funding together as a way to show a company can be successful in defense as well as in the commercial ecosystem. There just wasn't enough. There were examples of this, but it was not the way DoD did business as a whole. And in some cases, authority was lacking. It was either granted or lacking. Where it was granted, the results were much better. User centricity, getting users and developers together almost always led to great results. And finally, risk-taking culture. Where it existed in places like Special Operations Command, the results, creativity, innovation were much better. You can probably guess what our recommendation really centered on taking these 10 best practices and just centering them in every organization. If it worked for one, everyone ought to have the same playbook. And the DoD needs to standardize its correspondence process with industry so they can be on the critical path. If it doesn't do this, it's just going to be this wild card for companies, and that's not going to make DoD an investment partner of choice. We looked at DIU and OSC. We were very supportive of both organizations. We think they need empowerment. They need a strategic role that works in a complementary way with the services, and we outline some ideas about how to do that in our report. And so, the investment side of the valley, the money is there. There's $1.7 billion in early stage investment type funds, plus the 30 something billion in the research lab. The money is there. There's just not the want to. There certainly isn't the process if the want to was there to make winners in a systematic and sustainable basis. The middle of the valley is where things were interesting. There's nothing there. You go from R&D into the POM, and that doesn't work because R&D really funds a portfolio of companies on an almost yearly basis. And the POM at best is a 2-year process, often a 3 or 4 year process. And so if you go into a year of execution with a portfolio of companies, you don't know which ones are going to succeed. How do you possibly POM for them? You're left with this awkward situation of trying to find money to keep them alive or having them go back to their private investors, not knowing if there's a future check, and especially a recurring one. So we recommended that an oasis of funding be put in the middle of the valley so that if you are a successful prototype and a service is making a good faith commitment to put you into the POM, there is a line of accounting that does a couple of things. Gets you funding so that you're not worried about payroll and things of that nature. Allows you to keep productizing so that you'll be more successful going into the POM. Sends a clear signal to private investors that these are going to be the winners this year in the DoD market. And it also provides Congress a means of oversight. You're not asking for a blank check. You're telling them every year we've got 20 or 30 companies and a handful of them are going to be the winners that are going to go into this fund. So you're not overseeing it a programmatic way, the way that the POM is, but you can oversee it a portfolio way and a portfolio level that we thought was acceptable. Without it, the mismatch in timing between R&D and procurement and service contracts in the POMs is never going to let a company across the valley with a high degree of confidence. And we'll find the bones of a lot of great companies right there in the middle because there wasn't any way to keep them alive. And finally, on the procurement side of the valley, that's been looked at a lot, and it's being looked at both from acquisition reforms, from the PPPE process. We echo many of those recommendations. And I'll highlight a few that we thought were important for fixing and terraforming the valley. Reducing headquarters oversight across the board is so hard to move at the pace of industry because the time gets taxed in 1,000 little cuts that do not make the government capable of working at industry speed. Tech scouting and market research were just absent across the board because programs are funded late to need with staffs that are smaller than they need to be. They don't have time to go survey the world of technology the way that like a major investor would. This was a role we thought DIU could especially help with, being on the front lines, bringing a lot of great companies into the department and exposing them to the services. A lot of the ones I worked with during my time in the Air Force did come from DIU. They found them first. We took them to the next level. IT's got to be treated differently, or digital companies are not going to be able to transition to normal DoD programs because we don't have anything like the internet. And we've got to adopt modern industrial practices, or else our industry base will diverge from the one that's serving the rest of the world. So these are important because if you don't change these things, then there's no place for industry to go. They can productize, but it won't end up being for us. They'll end up going out and trying to be successful on the commercial market and leave us behind. So if you put these together, it's really doable. There's a lot to be done, but there's not a lot that we've said that's outside of DoD's authority. If it makes the investment side of the valley look more like private investment, where it's tiered, it places big bets, where there is communication that companies can depend on, we should expect it to be successful. It's often the first mover and it controls its market to a high degree. If there was a place those successful companies could go to that signals they're the winners that are going to be going into the POM, and there was someone to manage those companies and that money, then you'd get the benefit of DoD money and incentivizing private investment to come in to scale. Finally, if you don't make the procurement side of the valley more receptive for companies that are transitioning across, great, you build a product, but there's no place for you to go. So programs are going to have to be more frequent in their opportunities, or else these generational programs are not going to be well timed for many companies. And if you miss that boat, the next one's 30 years later. So all told, those were our findings, our recommendations, and we put a lot of the things we didn't get to, but we thought were good ideas in the appendices as a potential for future study items. And again, I've really enjoyed doing the study, enjoyed all the participants, and I hope the conclusions are valuable to the department and to the secretary.
Will, thank you, and Mac, thank you. You've done such a great job that we'll lean on you to do another study. Nicest compliment we can pay. We have to take a vote on this, so I ask each member to say yay or nay. Gilda?
Yeah.
Sue?
Yay.
Mike?
Yay.
Charles?
Yay.
Will?
Yay.
Ryan?
Yay.
Mac?
Yay.
Reed?
Yay.
Unanimous. Thank you both for your hard work and for the committees that did it all. And these are important recommendations. The Pentagon, the studies were done at the request of the Secretary of Defense, and I'm sure he will use them to make this country better and safer. Let us talk for a few seconds about our next set of tasks. Colleen, please share more information about the next priorities for the Defense Innovation Board, otherwise known as DIB, as well as any public comments that we have received.
Absolutely, absolutely. So thank you so much, board members. So today the studies you voted on, we'll be meeting with the secretary here, and I know schedules have shifted, so our board meeting will be a little shorter than we anticipated, but already talking about lowering barriers to innovation, mapping incentives. I know that had come up numerous times, I think, in both reports. And then also in some of the conversations and briefs you received today, really focusing on topics like generative AI, large language models, and the data that underpins all of that. So I think there's a lot of issues that will be right. Also talent, education and talent, we know was something too that was brought up in all of these. So Mr. Chair, as we go and speak with the secretary here in a bit, I think those will be some of the future areas well postured to deliver on. With that, I will read, we did receive public comments. I will read through a few of them here. You don't need to respond to them. We will be posting these online. But so the first one was, can you please talk about implementation ideas for these two studies? You know, in your report, there was a lot of great information. So you mentioned the appendices, but I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to.
Tried to be very, having served in government myself, there are some recommendations you can implement, some you can't. We tried to be focused within the bounds of the possible things that the services and that the Secretary of Defense can go do. There were only a couple of times that we created like a recommendation around how to like source the money for the OASIS fund in the middle of the valley, where we said, well, you could fund it a variety of ways. Some are directly in the department's control, others are potential legislative change requests for Congress. But on the whole, we scoped the study to be implementable. Doesn't mean it won't be painful. It's going to cut against everything, culturally, process-wise, budget-wise in this building. But I think we felt like doing that was more important than doing it perfectly on a clean sheet of paper, because there is this window of opportunity with investors and companies. And if the DoD finds itself lacking as a partner, who knows when this will be revisited.
I know in your study, culture was a big theme throughout, and so ideas on implementation.
Well, I would just say one of the points we made in our report was that as DoD looks to implement an implementation plan for the S&T strategy, that it be as unclassified as possible, so that the bright light of public opinion can help with the accountability and the urgency that we call for. There has been some talk to make it all classified, and that would remove it from that sort of personal scrutiny, and we discourage that.
The only thing that I'd add is I'm so heartened by the collective recognition of the moment and the intention of all the parties to do something to move us forward. You know, Colleen, you mentioned next studies. I think one of the opportunities we have is to take some of the recommendations of the first two studies and look at some of the practicalities, because oftentimes there's an impedance mismatch between processes that were developed for good reason, but are inadvertently impediments to doing some of the things. So I think one of the opportunities we have with this next set of studies is to take those and look at the more mundanities that actually can impede the progress we intend to.
Is mundanities a word?
I just became one, sir.
The second comment here, thank you very much for your work in helping DoD in its digital transformation. I'm curious where you see the priority of replacing legacy systems relative to producing new modern systems that support the warfighter. See smiles.
Well, since I lived it, I'm happy to take a step. If I was joining really hard getting new programs, Mac knows that from being over on the Hill, seeing how there can be competing ideas. The members of Congress, there are always competing ideas here in the building, even within the same service. Just a lot of competition, and I think that plus funding things late to need, which doesn't give you any time for new ideas and opportunities because you don't have the risk tolerance, so you go back. It puts this flywheel spinning where we kind of build something that's a little bit better version of what we had before. That's all that we have time to do. And because it's so difficult to get things into the palm, we keep things longer than we should. And in some cases, it stretches to like a generation where people are flying the same airplanes that their parents flew, even their grandparents flew. Well, that's not going to keep us up with China. So we felt that if you didn't treat the expiration date of a platform as importantly as the day it has its like initial operational capability declaration, then we're going to keep defaulting to generational programs, and that's just a losing strategy. Now, how does that happen? You got to be willing to fight. You got to be willing to make it important. It's the only thing that changes things in this building. It doesn't change because you reorg or create a different process. It changes because leaders are willing to carry the message and fight for change. No other solution to that other than putting the calories into the fight.
I also think there's Matt mentioned in his study the impact of culture, and we talk a lot about risk and risk management. I think one of the things you have to start deciding, are you going to take the risk with the present, or are you going to take the risk with the future? And heretofore, we tend to take risk with the future, right? That is, so we fund everything we're doing to completion, and we try and achieve the future with the rest of what's left over. And I think that mindset has to change. So I think that's an element of what you talked about. Is that's a big concept, and it's hard because the machine is designed to assure, but it really is something we're going to have to address, because if you do everything you've been doing and try and change with the remainder, you just won't get there. Just won't do it.
We actually a lot of the secretary and the execution. Those are huge jobs. You have to prioritize, but at the core of it is to change the culture in every aspect of this, not just either the S&T or the capital piece. And unless they do that, we'll keep doing more. We'll do fund down. We'll figure out down the road. When we get down the road, we'll fund the here and now, and we won't be able to make the change. You have to have leadership, which is really going to give you permission to take risk, quite frankly, and not punish you if you miss the target. That if they do that over a period of time, that will be infectious, and other people will figure it out. That will also bring more innovators into the field and into the community writ large. And the opposite is true as well. If you don't do that, certainly the innovators aren't going to show up. The small companies with great ideas aren't going to show up, and in many cases don't now, because that risk tolerance is so low, that the willingness to take risk is so low, and the bureaucracy wins time and time again. So this is what I've always worried about with these, not just these studies, but studies writ large, is with great ideas in them, and these do, but, you know, will the leadership be able to actually take them, prioritize them, and them? That's really critical.
Now it follows Quest.
Two cases, maybe more than that, that when, for an innovation organization, when the leaders changed and top cover changed, their ability to do mission, went from hero to zero.
Yeah.
So, having leaders that are not just, good managers and operators and logistician types keep the train running on time. You also have to conceive and build the airplane while you're making the trains run. And I think that's one of the biggest risks for all of this is we'll get leaders who are for this and are risk takers, and then we'll get a lead because you can't have perfect leaders, not in government, and there will be changes. It only takes one or two that are mistimed to put things on ice. I don't know how we fix that other than asking Congress to make it this important when they confirm people.
I would say in addition to all the culture changes, process changes, we need to make it easier for companies to interface with the DoD. We talked to a lot of companies, I forget how many now, but that was a consistent theme that there are lots of different buying points, lots of different procurement organizations, different formats, and it's just difficult to navigate the ecosystem and know where to start, how to get to a question's answer, what are they looking for, what's priority, and so there's no clear way to get started. And so a lot of people think the aggregation of all that, it puts off some startup. It's just too difficult to do business. You add to that the RFPs, the proposals, the response needed is so complex up front. It's a high cost just to respond to try to get in the game. And so I do think a lot of qualified people just decide to look elsewhere. And so what they asked for was simplicity. Is it a way to get a single starting point? Lots of organizations, innovation organizations in DoD, we can't track them all. Is there a way to aggregate that in a portal or some way for us to navigate this ourselves, express a clear need, and then some consistent funding, to your point, once we get started, that there's something on the other side of this if we actually are successful. So I guess some sort of client service, customer service aspect to this. People want to know, how do I do business with the DoD in a way that makes sense for a company my size?
Can you talk a little bit about, did you find, this is what I would call, say, the startup in the ecosphere, is the timing of our decisions in the building versus the timing of when they need capital, when they have to make decisions, and how disconnected that it seems to me that really is.
It's the money in the laboratories and the SBIR, Small Business Innovative Research, which, 1.7 in the latter, 30 some odd billion in the former. It's pretty flexible. It's there every year. It's maintained by Congress. It's well supported. It was way too peanut buttered. It's like the DoD investment was just seed Series A, and there's no one that's going to productize. Now, the services, and I'd say, obviously was there, but, part of what we did at the Air Force and they maintained is tiering the investment so that you can get from really small entry level to some larger prototyping things to some bigger contracts that can be as big as 60 million that will let you productize. Although you can't productize everything for 60 million, there'll still be gaps. And that was as big as you could get by law. But what we found is even if you did all of that and got it right, okay, so we're coming into this year. Let's say we take 10 big bets each year as a department. We got 10 companies. We don't know which ones are going to succeed. How do you plan for that? You can't put it in like a line item by type, by company, because you don't know who's going to win. And if you have to go back and fund them out of R&D, there's only so much resource you can get. Now you're not keeping your flywheel spinning. So we really thought that this is a case where we need something to bridge between, where we can tell Congress this isn't a blank check. It's one of these 10 companies, and we'll come tell you which ones succeeded and why. And then when we put them into the OASIS account, which is a little just reminder that the valley's barren in the middle, then it would tell those companies, you're moving towards the pump. It may not tell them at 100% confidence, but it's certainly better than being in R&D. It tells private investors, this is a good investment. It's like a good housekeeping seal of approval, and still gives oversight. Now, where to find the funding? right? There are several different mechanisms. Money's always hard. But if there were only one thing to be done, like that's something that has to be done. If you ever want to have a startup say, hey, I want a big recurring revenue contract. I was in a process I understood. I knew which phase I was in, and I knew when the next decision would be. Those decision gates don't exist in any formal way. So you're basically having to get a PhD in DoD to try to have any money from DoD. If walking down the hall to the acquisition undersecretary, there's a huge slide of the DoD acquisition system and the JSON systems. You know that's all documented. There's nothing like that for innovation. There needs to be, and it needs to be radically simple. Charles.
Okay, I'll end this here with one last question. What does the future of U.S. national security look like between public-private partners?
Shared responsibility.
Yeah, it has to. Maybe part of the share, if you will. And that's certainly key in terms of meeting the needs, generating technologies, getting it out to the workplace. I think it's not growing or not allowing it to grow or making it grow, whatever the right term is, at our perils. It just has to.
I think it's both parties. Value propositions are important and have to recognize the responsibility, and certainly the digital environment kind of obliterated some boundaries, made the private sector part of the threat surface. Our adversaries and competitors certainly realize where the great strength of America and our allies and partners are. So I just has to grow, has to be faster, has to be seamless, and has to come from a shared perspective of value.
I think it also, building on your point, I think it has to increase from a talent perspective,
Yes.
right? From a people, understanding our culture, understanding their culture, the sharing of ideas to kind of get through the people, process, technology of the building that ultimately that's gonna deliver capability. So it's definitely got to grow, definitely got to evolve.
Just add to that, like an enabler for all of those things to happen, to the compelling narrative that wraps around that, to tie in the mission, to bring in the best talent, to understand the importance to all of us, the national security and what comes out of national security for the benefit of society, basically.
Well, we're running a tech university. What would be your message today to students after your time on the DIB the last 6 months? Have you found a good nugget while you've been here that we can use?
I actually have been thrilled by having the opportunity to participate here, because what's really clear, the young people in particular want to make a difference in society. They want to use their education in important ways. And for the young people to see that, to be innovative, to use technology in creative ways, they can use their education that way in service of their country, in service of society and humanity. And that's why I was bringing up the point about the compelling narrative, because many times our young people don't see that. And if we can help them see how they can be contributors through their education and the importance of technology and innovation. And we need all the ideas coming from everywhere. So this time here to see that and to see the wealth of opportunities in national security, to use those creative minds and innovative ways of thinking and doing, has been really exciting.
Reed, we haven't forgotten about you. If you had any thoughts or comments.
Well, I mean, a strong +1 to a number of the comments that have been made. And, I think this is just reiterating some of the excellent things that have been said, but it's, we both have, a number of, amazing people that we've had the honor and the pleasure of interacting within the DoD. and, people who are, committed to, having a kind of a healthy innovation culture. But it's important, obviously, to make sure that we continue to, do the things that are a little unnatural, like take innovation risk, experiment with things that may or may not work in order to discover the right one. And it's been an honor to be part of this process.
Chair, turn it over to you.
Colleen, thank you. And to our viewers, thank you for tuning in. We hope you find the results informative and agree with them. And you can certainly write in. We'd love to have comments, no matter how good a job our two committees did. Even they will admit we can always add to that. I also want to say one thing, that we can't forget that we do have the most competent, dedicated military in the world today. Our objective is to make them even better and to make them be able to continue to keep us safe. We appreciate that they devote their careers and in some cases even their lives to letting us enjoy what is wonderful about America and giving us the freedom to, while we enjoy what's wonderful about America, to work internally and even make America better for everybody. It is the country where I grew up in, and I'm enormously proud of it. My daughters will live here for the rest of their lives, grandchildren, and I just wanted to say on behalf of all of the committee here, thank you. And I think a nice thing everyone could do is, as you walk down the street and if you see somebody in a military uniform, quick one-handed handshake or a fist bump and just say, thanks for keeping us safe, might be appropriate. So thank you, and we have a next meeting in the fall.
Yes, we do.
See you then.
All right, thank you. And with that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.